All right, guys, I'm going to give you a quick update on SARS-CoV-2 variants. I know you've just been dying to hear the latest on COVID. Like, you miss it. You miss all the COVID news. Admit it. You want to hear about it every day, get the update. So, all right. Obviously, we're all eager to move on from this pandemic, but we also know that the pandemic isn't over. People are still getting COVID. I'm still wearing a mask at work, which I think will probably never go away, is my guess at this point in time for healthcare. You know what I mean? At least not for the foreseeable future. COVID cases are still happening. The variants are still out there. So the big worry, of course, is that some new variant's going to crop up that's going to give us a new wave of COVID. It's going to be right back in it. The experts have been warning about the winter that's coming, and it could be a triple whammy because the last 2 years with mask wearing and social distancing, which work, right? There haven't been that many cases of the flu and other respiratory viruses that are prevented by things like wearing a mask and social distancing. So that means in just 2 years of not having a lot of flu or other respiratory illnesses, that we're more susceptible just as a population, right? And so we're going to get a bad flu year, and we're already getting a bad respiratory virus year. You probably heard about the spike in infant RSV cases, respiratory syncytial virus.
How's do you know yet how the flu shot is doing? Like, how is it performing this year?
Not well. Well, I don't know how it's performing, but I know flu vaccinations are down.
Right. So like people just aren't getting them.
They're not getting
it. We don't
it,
know
which is crazy.
If
You
it's
get
super
your
effective.
flu shot this year. It's really important this year because it could be a really bad flu year.
And go get your bivalent COVID. What are you doing?
Get your bivalent COVID vaccine. Absolutely. Yeah. So are we going to get another wave? What's happening with the variants? You might have heard conflicting things. There's stories floating around that the variants are getting less severe, more severe, spreading easier, whatever. So here's what's happening. So most of the variants now are subvariants of Omicron, right? So Omicron is still sort of the dominant variant, but we're seeing multiple subvariants of Omicron. But there are still there's still Delta out there. There's still other ones out there. But what's happening with the dominant variants is a couple of things. So there's a recent study, which this is actually really cool, where they looked at, they basically created a website that brings together all the data on the COVID variants into one database, so that researchers can go in there and look at basically like the family tree of all the COVID variants and start to see, what the relationships are. One thing that they're finding is that the same mutations are emerging over and over again in different branches of these COVID variants, which kind of makes sense because what's happening is, there's just so many viruses and so many infections. There's so many, like basically all the variants are happening, right? You know what I mean? Like there's so many opportunities for specific variants to occur. They're basically all happening. So what we're seeing in infections are the ones that are more likely to spread. And so those mutations are predominating over and over again in different branches. Mm-hmm. And so what those mutations, those subvariants do is they make the virus spread more easily, which includes evading prior immunity, including evading the immunity that results from prior infection and the vaccines, right? Because that's exactly the selective pressure. There is selective pressure to evade prior immunity and to spread easily. So those are the mutations that are predominating over and over again, right? Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah. Yes.
Yep. By the way, the database is called the Taxonium. That's a good name. That's not a number. Yeah. The Taxonium.
Okay. That works.
For taxonomy. You guys know what taxonomy is?
Yep.
All right. So
it's about taxes.
But are these variants and subvariants getting more or less deadly? And the answer is no.
Oh.
I'm not getting either. That's it's not selected for. You know what I mean? Like how deadly it is sort of tangential to the selective pressures, which are just to spread more easily. What we are seeing is that the severity of the infections are decreasing, but that has nothing to do necessarily with the variants themselves. That's because immunity is increasing,
right?
And our treatments are improving.
I gotta find out if I've had. How do you know if you've had COVID?
Because you've never had a clinical infection.
No.
Yeah, I mean, you can get tested, but
but at this point, like, would my antibodies, if I had been infected previously, would you be able to tell?
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. But I've never had COVID symptoms that necessitated testing. I've had exposures that necessitated testing, and those tests were always
Karen.
negative.
Yeah.
Right, Bob? Like, what's going on?
And
maybe we had it and we didn't have symptoms.
Which is possible. Could have had a clinical infection.
Yeah.
But maybe we're just less likely to get COVID.
Yeah, there are some people
right?
that research is happening too, Kara. There are some people who've never had a clinical infection with COVID, and there is research ongoing to say, well, why? Is there something genetically different about these people? What's happening? Maybe they have antibodies for some other things that are giving them some protection. So they're hoping that they'll discover something which will help improve treatment or prevention.
I'll be a guinea pig, man.
Yeah,
we'll be like Matt Damon in Contagion. He was just the only one walking around without a mask.
Yeah.
You guys remember? Because he couldn't get sick.
But there is research looking at the variant-specific symptoms. There's enough data now where we could say, well, if you had like the Delta variant, like the original variant versus the Delta variant versus the Omicron variant, are there any different assortment of COVID symptoms that are more likely to occur with one or the other? And the answer is yeah. So one of the big ones is that Omicron has less loss of taste and smell, which is nice, than the older variants.
That's good.
Yeah. Because I had when I had COVID in October, almost certainly the Omicron variant. I had no effect on my taste or smell. I also had a very mild infection, so I thought it was due to that because of I'm vaccinated and boosted.
Steve, is there any update on long COVID?
Yeah, well, there is. I mean, long COVID is the more we study it, the more of it there is that we're finding. It affects like 1 in 6 Americans, I read, are affected with long COVID at this point of some degree.
And it's like more complicated than we gave it credit for at the beginning.
Yes, it's more complicated. But they said that Omicron BA2, one of the subvariants, was associated with reporting more symptoms with greater disruption to daily activities than BA1. So there is, just to say, they were just saying there isn't this general trend of becoming more mild. BA2 is a later variant than BA1, and it's more severe. So it's just not a significant trend either way. It's kind of just it can go in any direction because, again, that's sort of tangential to the selective pressures. So that's where we are. These variants are still out there. They're getting good at evading existing immunity. We're not done yet. The good news is that we're no longer a naive population, immunologically speaking, and that's helpful. The vaccines are obviously helpful. Get up to date on your vaccines. Treatments like the Paxlovid works. You should definitely get that early on in the course of your symptoms if you do come down with COVID. We're still at pandemic level, and the pandemic is just going to slide into endemic. You know what I mean? Like it's not going to go away. This is not.
Has it already started that slide?
Yeah, I mean, but still technically a pandemic. But but I think people are now. I think they're learning to live with COVID. You know what I mean? It's like we're just going on with our life, and we know we're going to get it probably at some point. Most of us, it's like the flu. Like we don't disrupt our life because of it. But do get vaccinated. Do still stay home if you're sick. Mask if you're going to be in large crowds is still not a bad idea. Or if you're at a particularly vulnerable location or population or whatever. It's just is like the new normal now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah.